My very first bass was a precision bass. Actually, my very first bass was a Kenora bass. And that was a Japanese bass, cheap one that I spent about $35 on. That was 3 weeks' work in my mother's variety store to earn the money for that one. And then I saved up money for a precision bass. And I played that for the longest time, and then when I signed my first record deal in 1974, late 73, with the advance money I got for our record deal, I went out and bought my first Rickenbacker. And I played that Rickenbacker for a long time, and then I found this used 72 jazz bass in a pawn shop in Kalamazoo, Michigan, for $200. You know, it's one of those great stories. It came with a soft shell case and cigarette burns in the end and everything. And I fell in love with that bass. And I used the two of them for a while, and then I switched to a Steinberger when I was just getting bored. I wanted to try something radical. And plus I was playing so many keyboards in those days that I liked the fact that the Steinberger had no headstock, so I couldn't whack into the other mic as I was turning around. But then I found that the sound of the Steinberger unsatisfying in the bottom end, and eventually dropped that. And then I started experimenting with the wall basses when I started recording in England again in the 80s. And I like those basses a lot. But I started to miss the big kind of aggressive bottom end that the jazz had. And so I went back to my old jazz bass, and I haven't left it since. The Steinberger was, you know, just a different sound, and it was kind of a practical bass to use. But at the end of the day, I think it was, you know, just not very rewarding for the kind of music we play. The wall bass is a really interesting sound, beautifully made instrument. The guys, you know, that made those basses were great people, and they made me a lot of custom basses, and, you know, I was really happy to play them because I really supported that company. It was a great little company. And then the originator passed away, and Pete, the guy who made a lot of the basses, kept going for a while, but that was through a period where we were kind of, you know, through Hold Your Fire and Power Windows, when I was playing a funkier style of bass then, doing more kind of popping and different kind of runs, different kind of songs we were writing, a little jazzier maybe. And it seemed to suit the sound, but then when it came back to doing the record counterparts, I wanted to rock it out more. And it's just not a great rock bass, the wall bass, in terms of being a big beastie bottom end thing. So I pulled out my old Fender. On counterparts, I actually used that Fender plus an old Ampeg amp. And that reintroduced me to that sound, and I haven't gone away from that since. Eventually, I wanted to put more bottom into the sound. I got tired of that particular Ricky sound for a while, and started moving into the Fender. On the Moving Pictures album was really the first album I played a lot of my jazz bass. I played both those basses on that particular album, and I mean they both sound quite different, but people think they're the same bass. But if you listen to Red Barchetta, that's the Ricky, a typical Ricky sound. And if you listen to Tom Sawyer, that's the Fender on that sound. So they are slightly different, and I kind of like the Tom Sawyer-ish sound. So.
Is that the Rick on Limelight?
Limelight's the Rick, I think. No, I've tried and failed for years. And I finally found the answer is just play so fast they can't tell that you're out of tune. That's the secret for me to play a fretless bass. The passing notes have to pass very quickly.
Awesome.
Yeah, I was sent this, well, a friend of mine who works in our office, who's just recently, another musician, another bass player, Andy Curran, who used to play in a band called Coney Hatch, a great bass player and a great friend. He's working with us now, and he came down when we were recording the album, and he said, "Ged, you got to check out this Jaco Pastorius tribute bass." So he dialed it up online and showed it to me, and it looked amazing. So I called Fender and said, you know, asked them if they could send me one down just to play around with. So they sent one. And I picked it up and it was just like, oh my God, this bass feels amazing. The neck felt fantastic and the tone was ungodly, so I couldn't put it down. I kept playing it and playing it. So when I was doing my vocal takes in the other part of Allaire Studios, in between takes, I would just, you know, I'd start jamming. Just start doing that stuff. And Nick, our producer, unbeknownst to me, was recording it through the vocal mic acoustically. And at the end of it, he's going, "Man, that's a song. We've got to make that into a song." And Neil was there, and he said, "Okay, you and Pratt got to get together." You know, Neil's drums were gone because he'd finished all his drum parts ages ago. But he had a little 4-piece kit that he had left set up just for jamming purposes. So the next day, him and I went in and we just kind of put this jam together with Nick's help, and we recorded it. And Alex wasn't even there because he was in Florida dealing with some legal bullshit. So that's how we put that song, Malignant Narcissism, together. And then when Alex came, you know, the arrangement was done basically. He just needed to write a part for it, which he did. And, you know, our first 2-minute and 15-second instrumental was born. My first inspiration for that tone was Jack Bruce back in the early Cream days. And if you ever saw Jack Bruce live with Cream back then, his bass was very distorted live. It had this kind of, you know, he played an EBO, and it had this really kind of fuzzy, aggressive tone. It wasn't a high-end tone, it was kind of a mid-rangey, or lower mid-range kind of grunt. And at the same time, I was listening to guys like Jack Cassidy from Jefferson Airplane, and he had kind of this twangy edge to his sound too, and he played a hollow body bass, and it had this kind of neat edge to it. So my ear was always drawn to the bass players that had personality in their sound, not just in their playing. And John Entwistle, of course, you know, my generation was the classic wow, you know, sound for me of that period. With, you know, gee, there's even a little bass solo in there, and it's really growly and gritty. And I think he gave birth to a whole generation of English bass players like Chris Squire and people of that ilk who brought that tone. You know, Greg Lake. You know, Greg Lake had a really great deep bottom end and a real nice piano string top end. And Chris Squire had the perfect combination to me of bottom and grunty, twangy mid-range. And so those guys were a huge, huge influence on my sound.